Welcome back to the Lifeworks Living Well podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hennick. The future of work is changing. The 9-to-5 job that you work most of your adult life, clocking in at the office or work site, that's increasingly becoming a relic of a past generation. First, out of necessity, working from home became the norm for so many. For those who didn't have that luxury, in-person work is continuing to adapt to the new and persistently uncertain health, regulatory, and consumer environments. A growing number of people are opting out of the workforce entirely, either through early retirement, returning to school, or in some pursuing better options in a wave of resignations unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's hard to deny that what the average workplace will look like in 5 years could be unrecognizable from what we knew just 5 years ago. This is especially true for how workplaces care for the well-being of their people and for how people take care of and advocate for themselves. Today, I'm going to discuss the future of work with Sandy MacIntosh. Sandy is Executive Vice President of People and Culture and the Chief Human Resources Officer for Telus. I'm also joined today by Zabeen Hirji. Zabeen was previously the Chief Human Resources Officer for the Royal Bank of Canada, and currently, among her many other roles, she serves as an executive advisor on the future of work for Deloitte. So here's my conversation on future of work with Sandy and Zabeen. So Zabeen, I'd actually like to start with you. Stats Canada recently estimated that 40% of all can be done home. And that even after the COVID-19 pandemic is over, many of those employees are going to want to continue working. So I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on the necessary innovation and maybe the necessary growing pains of the last years from an employee perspective. You know, I think that this is an example of maybe some people feeling that remote work was even possible for them. Maybe they had a fear of the tools that were involved with that. Now, many have been pushed into it really without any other. So anyway, all that goes to say, what are your general thoughts on the learning curve last years and how people have been adapting to it so far?
Yeah, Mark, clearly where people work and where people are going to work from is the biggest topic of discussion across all organizations. And let me start really just a sort of broader context. And one of the things you asked about learning curve that I am really that really creates a lot of optimism for me is just how we as humans have realized how adaptable we really are. We couldn't have imagined that we would be working from home virtually overnight, almost 2 years ago now that we moved into this mode. And not just work. We started people en masse shopping online, a doctor's appointment online, students learning online. And so the big takeaway here is that we've really built this muscle of adaptability to learn and to learn fast. And that's something that's really important as we think about the future of work and the ongoing reskilling. And so as individuals, what we're seeing is this confidence level that is really saying, you know what, I can do a lot more than I thought. And I think to some extent, it's also driving the great resignation or the great rethink or, many different words for that. But employees really feeling that. And for organizations, I think it bodes really well in terms of that adaptability. So to get a little bit more, dig down a little bit more into some of the practical things in terms of the learnings, some things are pretty clear. Employees don't like the commute. It's great. You can avoid that. Flex time, fit in a walk during the day. In fact, Sandy and I did a beautiful ravine walk a few months ago in the middle of the day. Family time is another thing that people, I remember one man saying to me, Zabeen, I just had my second child during COVID. We just had our second child during COVID. And I just realized what I missed with my first child because now I'm getting to enjoy it. There's certainly some things that are not positive, and that's this blurring of work and life. When does your workday end? It's really hard to shut down when your office is in your home, and your office is often at your kitchen table. And people are working longer hours. That is not sustainable. We need to, as we move forward into what I see as a hybrid work environment, we really need to ensure that that longer hours issue is addressed. And the other thing, Mark, is isolation. There's so much social connection that comes from work. Young people, for example, say, my relationships, my social relationships, my work relationships are such an important part of my life. And they are also learning informal mentoring just by being around people. And so as we move forward, we really need to look at taking advantage of the things that are working well, but also adjusting and really ensuring that some of those negatives are considered, and organizations put in good practices to mitigate those.
Mm. Sandy, I want to bring you in here. Change every day, and most of the time it's temporary. We're responding to a crisis of kind. We don't really have to adapt in the way that Zabeen is mentioning, because things are changing all the time. But eventually, even temporary change held steady in the long term, by definition, it be the new normal, right? It sinks in as people acclimate. So how has the way we work presently, which largely has been a crisis response, an unusual situation, how has it structurally changed how we work, reactive into a new normal?
Yeah, I love the word new normal. I have a bit of laryngitis, so I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, I think Sabine really described really well what's changed and what people are liking, what we had to respond to. In our case at Telus, we had thousands of team members in call centers, and we would never imagine that we can get them out of the call centers, away from the equipment, and in homes. And we had actually projects in place to try to get them in the next 2 years, more migrating to at home. We had to get them at home in a month. So things that we never would have imagined we could do. And Zabine's right, we adapted and did in unprecedented times. We had a very much already a structure of flexibility. We had about 75% of our team members already working home on a regular basis, working from home or anywhere, quite frankly. So that concept for us was not new. It was in place. We started, in fact, in about 2006. We won't go back to 75-25. We're going to go back to 90-10. But just culturally, and the norm and the way of working with that flexibility was not new. And so, more of it will be the future way going forward. I think the one thing that really had to be emphasized over the last 2 years that I think no one wants to lose is leading with a humanistic approach, leading with compassion, and leading with flexibility. So, I think we've all had to understand that while people are under work pressure and the business needs to move on and we need to deliver, people have been juggling parenting at home, off and on restrictions, online tutoring and online education has not been easy. We know that there's lots of data that says it's been more difficult for women than for men. Zabeen hit on another demographic that it's been difficult for, the social isolation of team members in their 20s and 30s, where that water cooler, building a network, getting informal mentorship through connections in the physical workplace has been missing. And so we've all had to lean in a lot harder. In fact, one of my first asks of our leaders in March of 2020 was to ask them to really lead with compassion and to understand that there are human beings on the end of these computers, video calls, emails, work tools, that we just don't know what's going on in the household. Do they have elderly people they're looking after in their family and long-term care homes that they're concerned about? And I think team members have evaluated their needs, and they've evaluated how they want to work. They want to work with purpose. They want to work in an environment that is respectful of their needs. They don't want to give up on the flexibility. And if they've had the benefit of working for an organization that has looked after their health, and the health of their family, their well-being, they're not going to give that up. And we know that data says that that is the number one ask of team members, and compensation is dropping. It's not that it's not important. If people aren't paid well for the work they do, they will leave. We know that. But it really is dropping to 3, 4, and 5 on the list. And flexibility and looking after the health and the well-being of me and my family is no doubt going to be number one. So that's here to stay.
Now, of course, not everybody has the privilege of that flexibility, right? I mean, Zabeen, it's been found that, or to drive this home further, it's been found that education level correlated with your it's hard, I almost said pleasure of working from home, or the work home, because I've just adapted, I guess, to it that way. But education level is related to the ability, at least, to work. People with post-secondary education are much more likely to work from now and into the future than are those with a high school education or less. So on that point, do you see future of work as potentially widening existing social disparities between those people who have access to a higher education and those who don't? You know, how can companies, if they're interested in mitigating that risk, how can they do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you said earlier, about 40% of jobs can be done partially or fully from home. So that leaves 60% of jobs that can't. And it's quite a diverse set of roles. We're talking about certainly people who work in retail stores, people who work in banks, restaurants, healthcare workers, bus drivers. It's really it's not a one size fits all approach. And I would say that in terms of most people call them frontline workers. Many of those jobs don't necessarily require advanced education degrees, with the exception of healthcare, where that is definitely, they definitely have high education levels, and yet they have to work in the front line. So what's really important here, and some organizations are already doing that, is to think about picking up on Sandy's. She really punctuated the importance of flexibility. So what kind of flexibility can be provided to employees who can't do their work from home in terms of when they work? So one part of flexibility is where people work. The other part is when people work. So we're seeing organizations looking at 4-day work weeks, for example, or 9 days every 2 weeks. So at least you're giving people some of that time where they can take care of other things in their lives that they need to. We're also seeing with part-time employees, and many retail employees work part-time, and often they have short shifts. Sometimes they have multiple jobs in order to really create that full-time job. So it's important for organizations to step back and say, you know what? Can we provide people with longer shifts so that they have to come in fewer days, so that they can go down to one job? And again, it's giving them better quality of life as well as that flexibility. And along that, with shifts, it's giving employees more choice and lead time, and really allowing them to work those shifts and select those shifts that best fit into their lives. There's another really important point I'd like to make here in terms of this workforce that can't work from home, and that really relates to two things. One is the adoption of technology, and the related piece there is training and upskilling. So one of the things we've certainly seen during the pandemic is an acceleration of adoption of technologies. Robots, for example, there's a huge increase in the use of robotics, and taking away some of those repetitive, mundane tasks that people do. So what are organizations doing to reskill, to upskill their people so that they can move into other jobs? They can move into some of the jobs that give them career progression, which is really important, but also could provide them with that flexibility. And Mark, quite frankly, I'd like to see more conversation around this whole training and reskilling issue, which is so critical to, not only to employees, but to organizations. We have a massive labor shortage and it's not going away. And that's really a way to look at your own employees. How can you move them forward and really create this turbocharged internal mobility like we've never seen before, that really can create that win-win for employees to grow and be retained, and for organizations to be more productive, to be more sustainable, and to grow.
And Mark, if I can just jump, if I can just jump in there. Sandy. I mean, Zabeen is so right. We've had this conversation about labor shortage and wherever, however you want to describe it, the Great Resignation and whatever it is, the acceleration of technology and digital application and AI in the workforce, combined with what's happened in terms of us accelerating our digital world, which many people have said has progressed in the speed of 5 to 7 years in the first year, means we need to look inside at reskilling and offering certification and accreditation and skill development internally in our organization. There used to be a time where the idea, from a recruitment perspective, was to get as large a funnel as you possibly can in certain roles. Now we're lucky to get 1 or 2 people in a funnel for a particular role, at, whether it be digital, product technology, technologists, network architects. The whole world is looking for these individuals. So now the funnel is 2, 3 people, and it may take twice as long to find those individuals. So it is compulsory that we use this time to think inside about how we use, quite frankly, the talent we know that already scales and works well in our organization. And we think it's a win-win from a community, from a social perspective, and from an organization perspective.
Sandy, the idea of internships, right? We have lots of internships for students. What about internships for people in the organization already, and at the same scale that we do those internships for students?
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think this connects so into the student piece in particular, and the demographics of the changing workforce. Look, we were already on the precipice of a great change, right? Millennials and D are coming into the workforce, taking over management positions. The vast majority, of course, now are digital natives who have already been working in this kind of fast environment. So, combining this great resignation, whatever you want to call it, with the high turnover that was probably going to be happening anyway, Sandy, I'd like to say, how do you think the demographics of the workplace are going to continue to change the panel as well?
Yeah, I read a stat the other day, Mark, that said by 2025, 75% of team members in the workplace have only ever known computers and digital technology in their work. So it definitely, and when you think about the medical profession, and we very much have a virtual health technology division in Telus Health, and we're the lead provider of virtual health in Canada. We've even seen that same demographic shift happen in the medical community, where doctors with big paper files are becoming less and less of the community of medical professionals. So that shift is happening in all workplaces, no doubt. But what I would say is where I push back a little bit on the generational divide or differences in a workplace, what I would say is that I think the workplace mirrors what changes in society. So I see it as less of buckets or categories of people that we need to think about in a certain way. I think we need to think evolving our whole workplace in a way that's evolving the way society moves. And what that means is, as our values in society evolve towards respecting more diversity of thought in the workplace and inclusion of all kinds of demographics of our community in the workplace, and having representation at all levels in the workplace, then that's what has to, in the community, that's what has to happen in a workplace. The use of technology shifts. It has to shift for all team members in that workplace. And I do get a little bit concerned with the the bucketization, if you will, of generations. I think generally in a workplace, we have more in common, and we should, if our values are aligned and our goals and our purposes align, then we are different. I think where we need to think about differences are things like total rewards and the support that team members need at different stages in their life. So we very much look at the personas of our demographics as we design benefits. Or, there's demographics that care more about pension. There's other demographics with young families that care more about support for maternity leave and paternity leave or time off for adoptive parents. So that demographic is interesting as you support people through stages of their life. But on a whole, I think from a diversity and inclusive perspective, we've got to think about welcoming all generations and we just have to. We have a labor shortage and people are staying in the workforce much later. So there is a place for Generation Z and for boomers and X and millennial and everything in between, I think, to have a common purpose, common set of values, common set of goals, and norms in a culture that can get the best of all of that diversity of thought. I was reading an article the other day that the average age of a Nobel Prize winner is 63. The average age of presidents of large corporations is 62. There's lots of data that says that generation is working longer and has a lot to deliver and add by way of experience, mentorship, wisdom, tolerance, patience, guidance to offset some of the needs and desires of people coming into the workforce today. So I really think it's about a place for welcoming all of that diverse experience.
And I think the communication between these, even if they are arbitrary definitions between generations, but this idea, I think, of being less risk, being more risk averse at the top, being more stable, having a steady mind, having more experience. But that said, we still need the nimbleness and the openness. The openness to risk at a level of the organization as well. Otherwise, I don't know if we would have adapted as quickly as we have over the last year.
Mark, I have to, if I may,
please.
In most organizations today, and certainly in organizations Zabeen's worked in technology organizations, even in the top roles in those demographics, you need to be agile. You need to be rethinking your business. You need to be driving for continuous improvement. You need to be thinking with a curious mindset in order to create space for new business, to evolve for disruptive technology. Our markets are changing. So it's a requirement, I think, of all levels in the organization to be successful. So for sure, leaders are accountable for creating the right environment, so that fresh ideas and new ideas can be accepted, so that we can look at risk differently. We can look at ways to get to the market or products differently, so that innovation at all levels is critical. Tone from the top to allowing and inviting creation and innovation and fair process to come from all levels in the organization is critical. But I really don't think there's any level in the organization today that can't operate with that mindset. Mindset is key.
Yeah, Zabeen, I want to bring you in here too. This idea that it's more of a mindset than a generational difference. From my perspective, it seems like the most innovative companies, the most innovative people, they encounter a situation, crisis or not, but they grab it, work with it, reframe it, capitalize on it, rather than just try to build from scratch. It's better to catch a wave than to try to fill the ocean, and that's what I think the most innovative. Really, so there's an argument here that the best way to start is just to start, to fail, to be agile and adaptable. Do you think that the lessons of the pandemic in particular have really made the future work more flexible, more agile and adaptable because of this? People have been forced to be more agile.
Yeah, so my one word answer is yes. We have been in this for 2 years. That's a long time in terms of changing mindsets and just changing the way we work. As you were speaking, one thing that jumped into my into my mind right away is I was at RBC during the financial crisis, and I remember some of the lessons that we learned there are actually quite similar to today. And so we need to ask ourselves, why didn't they stick? And be very deliberate in organizations about making sure, as we move out of this pandemic, that they are being very deliberately embedded. And let me give you a couple of examples. One of them is this breakdown of hierarchy. And what that means is really what we've seen during this pandemic, and interestingly, I saw during the financial crisis, is you'd have this daily huddle. You would bring in people at all levels of the organization. It was not a hierarchy of level, it was a hierarchy of knowledge. Who needs to be in the room to get all the information out there we need? And how then can we get comfortable to make a decision with imperfect information? Because this striving for perfection and a perfect set of information, we all know is an impossible task. And that's what happens in terms of risk management. People are saying, oh, we need a little bit more information. We need more of this, more analysis. But what we've learned here is bring the right people in the room, time box the decisions that you need to make, and then really monitor. And this notion of fail fast, I'm not sure I love the word fail, but it's really learn fast. Failing is the journey to learning and to get better. And so really important, the message here for me is for organizations to really, really embed that. And I would also say, the other very important part of this, and Sandy touched on it, is the future of leadership is human. And this notion of empathy and compassion is, again, something we've had to draw on in order to ensure that people were well, people were able to be productive. But when I start to think about that, I think as human beings, we all want to be empathetic and compassionate. It is what we're all about. But for some reason, we have a different persona at home and in the office. And what happened here is it all came together. So embedding that empathy and compassion, to me, we use the two words sometimes even interchangeably. Empathy is putting yourself in someone's shoes, listening. Compassion is actually helping them come up with solutions. And I think what employees are really looking for from their leaders and their coworkers is more of that. Yes, you've heard some of the issues I have, and it could play out even with flexible work. Now, how do we work together to actually come up with some solutions? So I'm very optimistic that our organizational cultures will change. There's a lot of pressure. It's leaders and employees are all pushing for that, and that we will and are on our way to building a future of work that's going to work for all.
Sandy MacIntosh is the Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Telus. Zabeen Hirji is an Executive Advisor on Future of Work for Deloitte. Both for being with me today. That's all the time we have, unfortunately. It was great talking with you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
In our changing world, there is an unchanging principle for success that inspires us. By improving a person's life, we'll improve how they perform at work. We are Lifeworks. We are the world's leading total well-being provider. We are innovators with tech-enabled solutions. Our mission is to improve people's lives by supporting the whole person, their mental, financial, physical, and social well-being. These people are the heart of successful organizations, leading these organizations to a more resilient future and making a real difference in the world and in our communities. Improving lives, improving business. We are Lifeworks.
We're almost out of time, but before we go, I'd like you to hear from just one more person. Paula Allen is the Global Leader and Senior Vice President of Research and Total Wellbeing for Lifeworks. Paula, thanks for coming back on the show with me today.
Always a pleasure speaking with you, Mark.
So we just had a conversation about the future of work. Given that there's a greater appreciation now, and I think only an increasing appreciation for employee support woven into the fabric of the future of work, I'd like you to tell me a bit more about the Lifeworks Wellbeing Platform and EAP services.
Well, for sure, there's a greater appreciation, but there's also a greater need. We're interweaving work and mental health, and the impact on both on each other has never been greater. So Lifeworks has done a number of things. We have our well-being platform that basically puts well-being in the hands of every single employee and their family members, wherever they are, whether they're working hybrid or remote or traveling or anywhere. And we've also made it a little bit easier. One of the initiatives that we have is in partnership with Microsoft. We know that there's a number of organizations who are using Microsoft Teams as a way to communicate, and people are living inside that platform. So we've integrated it as part of that technology as well.
That's incredible. So now what kinds of support are employees getting through Lifeworks?
Basically, it's designed to give you the type and level of support that you need at any given moment. So there's practical information around, how you can manage challenges that everyone has, like with children, with speaking about the pandemic to your children, with time management, things that cause us undue stress, right through to in-depth support with a counselor. So everything in between is available, from video counseling to self-service mental health programs to group programs, but it's a full continuum of services, again, intended to give every single employee and family member the type and level of support that they need at that moment.
And that'll be so key, especially with people working from home permanently, I think. So where can listeners learn more and maybe even get access to Lifeworks EAP services?
You can reach us. Our contact information and all the locations where we do business is available on our website, lifeworks.com. And a Lifeworks professional will be very happy to help you understand the best thing that's available for your organization. And if you're an employee, really ask your human resources department, ask your manager what kind of support is available to you. You may not know, because sometimes we have other names that we present ourselves in organizations. You may not know that you have access to everything that I had mentioned, and we certainly want to make sure that you do know that.
Paula Allen is the Global Leader and Senior Vice President of Research and Total Wellbeing for Lifeworks. Thanks for joining me today, Paula.
A pleasure.
That's it for this week on Living Well. I've been your host, Mark Hennick. Many thanks to all of my guests today. And thanks to you, as always, for listening. Make sure that you like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening or watching today: YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else. You can go back and check out all of the episodes from our 3 seasons so far on any of those platforms, as well as at livingwellpod.com. You can connect with me directly on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Mark Hennick. Let me know what you thought about the show today. If you found it helpful, please share it with your networks. Thanks again for the gift of your time. I've been your host, Mark Hennick. Until next time, take care and live well.